during COVID. Ships could no longer travel freely because of isolation. Ships could no longer carry freight because everyone was sick. There were countries weren't allowing foreign ships to dock. We had massive supply chain issues, not only because of the newly emerged need for lots and lots of PPE, medical equipment, medicines, ventilators, all of this stuff suddenly needed more production and more shipping. Food prices raised exponentially during this because there was less food being imported by each country because there was less food being exported by each country. And this led to weeks of paralysis and backlogs. Mail services were delayed after airlines suspended flights between China and the rest of the world. U.S. chip makers, Intel and Chinese smartphones joined other tech giants withdrawing from major European technology fair over virus concerns. Prices for oil, copper, other basic building commodities dwindled because nobody was building because everyone was on lockdown, or sick, or dying, or afraid to allow things from other countries into their country due to fear of contamination, due to fear of spreading illness. China alone accounted for half the growth of the world's oil demand in the last year. This is from 2020. It buys more than 40% of the world's iron ore, nickel, aluminum, copper, and finished steel. Shuttered factories and travel restrictions in China contributed to a 20% drop in oil prices, which was good. Less people were driving, there were less ships moving around, there was less cars on the road, so fuel prices dropped. But as a result of this, prices for copper, soybeans, and lean hogs fell more than 6% over time. Much of China remained in lockdown at this time. Even factories that are open must contend with logistical bottlenecks and labor shortages and travel restrictions, preventing employees from returning to work after their New Year's. All of that is worrisome news for multinational companies that grew to depend on China for everything from auto parts to toys. This is the worst supply chain problem I've ever seen in 40 years, said Isaac Larian, CEO and founder of the toy maker MGA Entertainment, which produces popular toys. But this goes far beyond toys. This affected food. This affected medicine to a much, much greater degree. We all remember the supermarket rushes where everyone was afraid that there would be no food left. So they went and rushed the supermarket and bought everything they could, which in turn created restrictions on how much stuff you could buy, which created more panic because now there was restrictions on how much you could buy of things, which made people think things were going to run out. And this increase in demand, while the drop in the amount of supply coming in resulted in higher prices. Now, to be clear here, yes, prices for things like food, I'm just going to use food as an example here. Food prices did rise because of COVID. Inflation did rise because of COVID. Because of the governments of the world subsidizing the lives of their citizens because people could not go to work safely. But this was also used as an excuse to price gouge all over the world. Now, I have a few articles to go through regarding price gouging specifically, that we can tie directly to this, to the logistical issues that came from COVID. But I still want to finish making the point of it is incredibly easy to disrupt this system. One virus that was brand new, that came out of nowhere, that we didn't expect, shut down the entire world, killed millions of people, but also impacted millions more through the increase of food prices, of medicine prices. Now, if you live in a place like America, you may not have been hit as hard by this. In fact, some of your prices may have even gone down. But let's say you live in a poor country in the middle of Africa. Let's say you live in Somalia, just as an example, because we went over Somalia. If there is less food being shipped around the world, there are less cargo ships moving around. People are sick, crew members get sick because they're in enclosed spaces, ships are prohibited from entering certain countries, from docking, lots of tests need to be done before goods can be unloaded, resulted in significantly higher food prices in these sorts of countries. And the death toll from that is not accounted in the millions death toll of COVID. Now, I'm not going to read this whole article. So this is from the National Library of Medicine. COVID-19 affected the world's socioeconomic food security more than other infectious diseases. In many countries, food industry workers were moderated because of the pandemic. Much of the food factories were caused to slow down their production. Airline closures, national and international restrictions, lockdowns severely disrupted the food supply chain. These, along with structural weaknesses in the world's food system, such as production, distribution, access, and stability in the food chain, much of these we went over in the previous video, exposed more people to food crises and acute hunger in the world. Therefore, it's necessary to use proper planning and government organization to address this. So, the Global Report on Food Crisis, FSIN 2020, showed that approximately 135 million people in 55 countries were affected by acute food insecurity, of which 73 million were in 36 countries in Africa. The United Nations reported that COVID-19 likely to increase poverty and food insecurity on a global scale. Now, this is a paper written in 2022. Food insecurity has become more and more of an issue, not just in underdeveloped countries, not just in poor countries in Africa. We can see this today in the United States. This is from February of this year. Price gouging, not just from COVID, but also from things like the Ukraine war, which I am going to go into as well, have been used as an excuse by corporate executives to increase the prices of food, to increase their profit margins to substantial amounts, while most of you can go out and talk to 100 Americans, and at least half of them worry about buying groceries. At least half of them limit the food that they eat and how much they're eating it now. Food prices have continued to go up, and they will continue to go up. They will never go back down to what they were pre-pandemic, because that's just not how it works. So the question isn't, is it okay for these prices to go up? Of course, that's how free markets work. When supply is low and demand is high, the price goes up. However, the amount the price has gone up on many, many important food items does not equate to the amount that it mathematically should have. There is a higher percentage than was required. And where is that percentage going? It's going into the pockets of executives. $238 billion between 7 people in this family. And their wealth increased by another $8.8 billion in 2 years. Billions here is what we're talking about. This is not small numbers. These are massive, massive, massive profits. The highest profits ever recorded in some cases. The highest profits in 70 years in other cases. And this is not just the case in the United States. This is also the case in places like, oh, come on, mouse, work with me here. Places like Australia. This is from 2 months ago. Everything is going up in price and products are shrinking. Readers have their say on Australian supermarkets. Pricing to deliberately confused. My partner and I used to buy baby spinach leaves in bags. The bags were 500 grams and were $5. We noticed we ran out earlier without changing our eating habits. Guess what? 500 grams is now 280 grams and the price is still $5. 1 kilogram coffee beans at Kohl's, which is a supermarket, jumped from $18 per kilogram to $32 per kilogram about a year ago. It had been at around $18 for many years, held at the higher price for a couple months, and then was discounted to the down price of $19, quoting that it was at $32. Stayed at the $19 mark for a few months, then back up to $32. Has cycled back through down, and back up a couple of times. Went back to 19 a couple of weeks ago. These tactics are not just being used in Australia. They're being used on you, everywhere, no matter who you are or where you're watching. The supermarkets, almost certainly, anywhere in the Western world, have increased their profits at your expense. Michelle from Queensland says, I've been buying the same items week after week and have seen increases each week. Mainland cheese slices were $9.50 and now they're $11. What annoys me most is that Woolworths puts a sticker saying that they were $12, price dropped to $11. They were never $12. Cadbury chocolate was $6 last week, now it's $7. John West salmon slices were $3.95, slowly increased to $4.90 per tin. I eat less so I can afford to pay my bills, says Bill Radley. Toby's 1 kilogram oats was $3.50 prior to the pandemic. Now it's $6.50. Now I wait until it's on special for as little as $3.50 and buy 10 boxes at a time. I'm not eating oats as regularly, and I'm always looking for good breakfast alternatives. Where should I start? Everything is increased. Gluten-free products, grated cheeses, block cheeses, cream, bacon, everything is going up, and your wages are not. I don't know if the wages in Australia are going up. I think they are slightly, depending on the field that you work in, but not anywhere near enough to cover these rising costs. To the point where a Senate inquiry has been held with the CEOs of both Kohl's and Woolworths. Woolworths boss Brad Banducci threatened with contempt charge in a fiery Senate inquiry hearing. Chair Nick McKim takes issue with the CEO's refusal to disclose company's returns on equity amid claims of price gouging. A parliamentary inquiry threatened to hold the chief executive of Woolworths in contempt during a fiery debate during hearings as Australia's big supermarket chains face claims that they are price gouging shoppers and coerce suppliers. Banducci was asked by the Senate committee on Tuesday to disclose the company's return on equity, an important gauge of profitability among discussion over whether its profit levels are reasonable in a cost of living crisis. Banducci repeatedly declined the answer to the question, preferred to cite different profit metrics that were lower and he argued were more relevant. The Greens Senator Nick McKim, who chairs the Senate Committee into Supermarket Practices, warned Banducci that he may be found in contempt, which he carries a penalty up to 6 months of imprisonment. God damn, you should do that for people like Trump. Wish we had that kind of contempt of lying to the Senate, or, well, I suppose Trump's not having a Senate hearing at the moment, but, you know, little tangent off the side there. McKim and Banducci were engaging in spin, cherry-picking facts, and bullshitting the committee, said McKim. I put it to you, the reason you don't want to focus on return on equity is because you don't like the story that it's telling, which is that you are basically profiteering and making off with massive profits at the expense of farmers, at the expense of your workers, and at the expense of the Australian shoppers who you are price gouging, McKim said. For you. Why won't you answer a simple question about what your ROE is? Are you struggling with ordinary English language, meaning of words, are you struggling with the ordinary English language, meaning of the words that I am using in my questions? Maybe I'm struggling with the ordinary English language. Banducci said it was not relevant to price, not a relevant price gauge for Woolworths. With respect, we look at return on investment, Banducci said, referring to a measurement of investment efficiency. I'm focusing on your corporate finance, Senator. That is what we use. Banducci told the committee Australians wouldn't shop at Woolworths if it price gouged. Just for some context, there's like 3 supermarkets in Australia that you can shop at, and they're all they're all being, investigated by this committee for price gouging. Just as a little context. Yeah, so won't even answer the questions. The inquiry is designed to investigate how big supermarkets set prices for shoppers and use their market power when dealing with suppliers. Kohl's and Woolworths collectively control 2/3 of the market. So I was right, there's 3. There has been a sharp focus on strong profits recorded by Kohl's and Woolworths during a period of fast rising grocery prices. Annual profit is more than $1 billion for Kohl's and Woolworths. How much larger than normal? Let's see. Analysis by Analysis by Guardian Australia shows that Woolworths' food business profit margins were at least 5.4% in the last full year before the pandemic, before hitting 6% in the last financial year. This represents a significant lift in a high volume sector where a small rise leads to much bigger profits. The 6% margins is the highest Woolworths has recorded since it started separately reporting Australian food profit margins in 2016. Before that, the data is compiled. Okay, I need a second. I clearly cannot speak English. These margins helped Kohl's post a full $1.1 billion full-year profit as its most recent full-year results, while Woolworths lifted its annual profit to $1.6 billion. Both of these results were more than 4% higher than those recorded the year before, making a profitable period of the supermarkets at the same time as their customers grappled with fast rising grocery prices. I'm gonna open this window. Food consumption data shows that households have been buying less food, especially fruits and vegetables, as prices rise. The slump in demand, however, has not dented supermarket profit margins as it typically would in a competitive market. Now, what does this actually mean? If people are buying less food from the supermarkets, and the supermarkets' profits are not decreasing, this means that those profits are coming from somewhere. Those profits are coming from the rising price of food that people are buying. You can't just not buy food, you need it to survive, we all do. So no matter what, people are going to be buying food from these supermarkets. They control two-thirds of the market just by these two supermarkets. And so it doesn't matter how much they raise their prices, you have to suck it up and buy it, or you die. Unless you live on a self-sufficient farm, or like a commune in the middle of nowhere, you need to buy food from these people. And they won't answer the questions that the government is asking them on what their return on return on equity is. Now, return on equity, defined, is the measure of a company's annual return, net income, divided by the value of its total shareholders' equity, expressed as a percentage. Now, I am not an economist, but this calculation is used to show, hold on, right here, net income divided by stockholder equity equals return on equity. This shows what the actual profits of the company is, how much this guy, Brad Banducci, is making, how much the executives are making, comes from this equation. How much the company makes in net profits divided by how much they pay off the shareholders results in money left over that is used not to invest into research and development or whatever supermarkets would invest money into, but is just pocketed by these executives. It's a very clever trick that this guy's trying to use, and this senator, who is the chair of the Committee into Supermarket Practices, is smart enough to know that it's bullshit. It's all bullshit. Not answering this question is admitting to guilt. The Kohl's chief executive, Leah Weckert, avoided a confrontation with the Senate committee by disclosing the company's relevant profit metric at the start of her questioning on Tuesday. Kohl's was taken to task, however, for not providing details to the committee on product profit margins and sales figures, which Weckert said was commercially sensitive data. She said Kohl's would not provide the data to would provide the data to a separate inquiry by the competition regulator if requested because of confidentiality measures that are in place. Reichert acknowledged that supermarket companies need to improve how it interacts with produce suppliers, and then claims of the major chains unfairly use their market power when negotiating prices, which is a whole other line of this that we haven't even analyzed, is the people who produce the food, which, again, we went over last stream. 80% of the food production in the world is produced by small farms. And the prices that they get for the production of their goods and for their labor in relation to these major chains who have all the power. We acknowledge that we don't always get it right, but all our producers seek to ensure fair and sustainable relationships. The inquiry has heard many suppliers fear raising concerns with Kohl's and Woolworths because of their market dominance. Of course, what are you going to do? You're going to complain to the only people that you can sell to? Fresh produce producers and the dairy sector told the committee that their sectors are at threat due in part to what they describe as unsustainable pricing demands. Kohl's representatives offered to meet and blah, 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 blah. They won't answer the questions. They know for a fact that what they are doing is price gouging, is illegal, is wrong, and is harming millions of people. And that's just in Australia alone. We have the same problem in the United States. The same problem exists in the UK and Germany and France and all over the EU. The same problem exists in China and Russia, in India and Pakistan, in South America it's even worse. These problems all stem from the same place. Corporations seeking more profit for themselves at the expense of the consumer, at the expense of those who labor to create the things that these corporations sell, at the expense of your wages, it's just disgusting. Like the practices have been so well ingrained into the system, they're all built in to function this way. You don't get paid enough. You pay them more. They pay the people that they're buying stuff to sell you less, and they make off with all the extra money in their pocket and go home even richer. This is how the system is meant to function. It's how it's been built. And sure, that Senate inquiry was nice. It was fun reading an Australian senator calling out a corporate executive on their bullshit and threatening them with contempt and imprisonment. That's great. It's not going to change the problem. These supermarkets haven't decreased their prices. They pretend to. There was viral videos on TikTok and all over Instagram a few months ago relating to this, where suddenly the inquiry started and everything in the supermarket was on sale. They just had sale stickers all across the board. It's just an admission of guilt, and it's also them saying, ha ha, fuck you, we can do whatever we want, and you're stuck buying our food because what are you going to do, starve to death? And they're not wrong. We can't do anything about it. It's just how it is. Except we can do things about it, isn't it? Can't we? We can regulate these industries. We can break up monopolies. If Kohl's and Woolworths control 2/3 of all of the supermarket market in Australia, then break them up. Make them control less of the market. Introduce smaller grocery chains and subsidize them. So one thing that I did want to touch on before we move on is what can you do to combat the price gouging wherever you live, whether it's in the United States, whether it's in Australia, the UK, France, Germany, India, wherever. It doesn't, where you live isn't the issue here. What can you personally do? Well, you can go to the supermarket and you can record. You can take pictures, take videos of the prices of food on shelves. You can document these and save them. And every time you see practices such as were described in that Guardian article of cycling between raising prices, $18 to $32 for coffee beans it was, and then back down to 19 saying it's like a price drop. These kinds of practices are, or should be at the very least, if they're not, criminal. And by documenting this, by recording this, by posting it online, by engaging in conversations about this with others, we can put pressure on these companies. We can put pressure on our elected officials to regulate this, to close these loopholes, to stop this from being a practice that is allowed and to continue to exist. The suffering that this is causing is not minuscule. There are millions, billions of people around the world who cannot afford to feed themselves and their families. And it's a direct result of these practices of not only price gouging, but manipulating prices to make it look like things are on sale, to make it look like they're doing the right thing. These are all disgusting practices. And advocate for higher wages for food producers, which again, 80% of the world's food is produced by small farms, not industrial farming operations. Most of those produce commodities, not food that you are eating. Run for your local councils. Run for your state and local boards. Run for Senate and change these laws from the bottom up, because it does not work from the top down. Wealth never has and never will trickle from the top down.